Cancel your wedding or we're not coming. My father, Thomas, barked through the phone speaker, his voice cutting through the quiet space of my kitchen just 7 days before I was scheduled to walk down the aisle. I sat at the granite counter holding a silver pen over a stack of printed seating charts, staring at the physical manifestation of 18 months of rigorous planning and financial sacrifice. My mother, Helen, shouted from the background, her tone carrying the sharp, familiar edge of entitlement I spent my childhood navigating. Sarah found a promotional package online. The Istanbul Cosmetic Clinic only offers the discount this specific week. Call your venue. Tell them we have a family medical trip. They will understand and move your date. I placed the pen on the counter and looked at the calendar pinned to my refrigerator, tracing the days leading up to the ceremony. I spent $40,000 of my own saved income to secure the historic Botanical Garden venue, paying the non-refundable balances through grueling weekend double shifts at the Physical Rehabilitation Center where I worked as a licensed therapist. I mailed the save-the-date cards a full 6 months in advance, following up with the formal invitations 3 months later. My parents received the very first envelopes. I reminded my father about the signed vendor contracts, the finalized catering headcounts, the floral orders already in transit, and the sheer impossibility of moving a massive event 1 week prior without forfeiting every dollar I invested. He exhaled a harsh breath into the receiver, treating my financial reality as a minor inconvenience. People will remember your wedding for just a day, Nora. Sarah is trying to improve her self-esteem. You know she struggles with her image. You need to be supportive. We are flying out on Thursday. If you choose to be stubborn and keep the date, you will walk down that aisle alone. I did not raise my voice, nor did I attempt to plead with them, because I understood this demand represented the pinnacle of a lifelong family culture. For 28 years, my parents functioned as a dedicated, uncompromising crisis management team for my younger sister Sarah. When Sarah dropped out of a prestigious university nursing program during her first semester because the professors assigned required weekend reading, my father paid off her tuition debt and leased her a luxury sedan to ease her transition back home. 2 years later, when she quit an entry-level administrative job because she disliked the corporate dress code, my mother subsidized a downtown loft apartment to protect Sarah from the stress of living with roommates. Conversely, when I graduated from my master's program, working overnight shifts monitoring postoperative patients to avoid accumulating student loans, they skipped my commencement ceremony to help Sarah decorate that same subsidized apartment. They viewed my self-sufficiency as an excuse to ignore my existence, channeling their finances and emotional bandwidth into maintaining Sarah's ego and shielding her from the consequences of her own choices. They demanded I absorb the financial ruin of a canceled wedding because they operated under the assumption that my boundaries would collapse under the threat of their disapproval and public absence. Have a safe flight to Istanbul, I replied, ending the call and placing the phone face down on the counters. I did not contact my vendors. I did not alter the timeline, and I did not shed a single drop of tear over their decision. I walked into my bedroom, packed my rehearsal dinner dress into a garment bag, and prepared for my week. The wedding day arrived crisp and clear, devoid of the manufactured drama my family usually provided. I stood in the bridal suite overlooking the well-mown garden lawns, wearing a structured ivory gown I selected alone, watching our friends, colleagues, and extended relatives take their seats. My fiancé, David, knew the extent of my family's neglect and offered unwavering support, standing at the altar with a steady gaze when the string instruments began playing the processional march. I walked down the aisle unaccompanied, my posture straight and my steps measured. I kept my eyes focused forward on David, refusing to look at the 2 empty wooden chairs sitting in the front row, reserved for the parents of the bride. We exchanged our vows under a floral archway, signed the legal marriage certificate with our witnesses, and hosted a reception filled with people who valued our presence and celebrated our union. We ate dinner, we danced, and we celebrated the life we built, independent of their toxic orbit. The next morning, David and I drove to the international airport, boarded a southbound flight, and traveled to Costa Rica for a 2-week honeymoon in a secluded coastal villa. I powered down my phone before the aircraft pushed back from the gate, intending to spend the trip disconnected from the noise and dysfunction of my hometown. We arrived at the villa, unpacked our luggage, and spent the first 48 hours swimming in the ocean, eating fresh local seafood, and sleeping without an alarm clock dictating our schedule. On the morning of our 3rd day in Costa Rica, I sat on the wooden deck listening to the waves crash against the shoreline, deciding to check the local weather forecast for a scheduled afternoon boat excursion. I walked into the bedroom, plugged my phone into the wall charger, and pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, freezing for several seconds, as the internal processor struggled to download a massive backlog of data from the cellular network. The notification counter climbed with alarming speed. I had 67 missed calls from a number bearing a Turkish country code. Beneath the missed calls sat a relentless string of text messages and voicemails from my father and Helen. I opened the message thread, reading a chronological descent into absolute panic. The first text arrived from my mother Helen on the evening of my wedding day. The clinic is in a strip mall. The doctor does not speak English. Sarah is in pain. Her upper lip is turning white. 12 hours later, my father began sending rapid, fragmented messages. Answer your phone. We are at a public hospital. Sarah has a vascular occlusion. The filler blocked an artery. The tissue is dying. They do not accept our insurance. I walked back out to the deck, sat in the lounge chair, dialed into my voicemail inbox, and placed the phone on the wooden table on speaker mode. My mother's voice filled the quiet morning air, strained and frantic, the background audio echoing with the chaotic noise of a foreign emergency room. She explained the discount clinic Sarah booked utilized unverified dermal fillers administered by unlicensed technicians. A technician injected a dense bolus of product directly into Sarah's superior labial artery, instantly cutting off the blood supply to her lip and the surrounding facial tissue. When Sarah screamed in agony, the clinic staff claimed the severe blanching was normal swelling and refused to administer a dissolving agent. My father's voicemail followed, stripped of his usual arrogant authority and replaced by raw desperation. He stated that the public hospital managed to stabilize her vitals, but the advancing necrosis required a highly specialized plastic surgeon to perform an emergency reconstructive procedure to salvage her face. Without the surgery, Sarah faced permanent severe facial disfigurement and the loss of her upper lip. The core of their crisis resided in the final 3 voicemails. They located a renowned facial reconstruction specialist in Istanbul who reviewed the tissue damage and agreed to operate, but the surgeon demanded immediate upfront payment. To perform the urgent revision, the surgeon had to cancel 3 lucrative elective surgeries booked for his afternoon slots, prompting him to double his standard rate to cover the cancellations and presenting my father with a staggering $30,000 invoice. My parents exhausted their liquid checking accounts purchasing the premium international flights and the luxury hotel accommodations. When my father attempted to use his high-limit credit cards to pay the initial hospital admission fees, his bank flagged the sudden massive foreign medical transactions as fraudulent and locked the accounts. They were stranded in a Turkish hospital lobby, staring at a surgical bill they could not finance, watching the tissue on their golden child's face turn black. My father's final voicemail delivered the demand. Nora, we know you received cash envelopes at the wedding reception. You have the savings. Please go to a bank. Wire $25,000 to this routing number right now. We will figure out repayment later. Do not ignore this. Her face is rotting. I sat on the deck, letting the silence of the tropical morning wash over me. David walked out of the sliding glass doors holding 2 cups of coffee, saw the expression on my face, and looked at the glowing phone screen displaying the foreign numbers. I summarized the voicemails, stating the medical facts and the financial demands without adding emotional commentary. I explained the vascular occlusion, the exorbitant revision fee, the locked credit cards, and their assumption that I would liquidate our wedding gifts to rescue them from a disaster they orchestrated. David handed me a coffee cup, taking a seat in the adjacent chair. He told me the money in our joint account belonged to our future, but the decision on how to respond belonged to me. I looked at the foreign phone numbers lighting up my screen with another incoming call. I traced the sequence of their logic. They demanded I cancel my wedding to accommodate a cosmetic appointment. I refused. They attended the appointment. The appointment failed. They demanded I fund the correction. They assumed my role as the neglected daughter required me to serve as their emergency financial reservoir, discarding my boundaries whenever Sarah faced a consequence. I picked up the phone, navigated to the settings menu, and activated airplane mode, cutting off the incoming call mid-ring. I left the device inside the bedroom drawer for the remainder of the trip. We spent the rest of our honeymoon exploring the rainforest, taking the boat excursion along the coast, and enjoying the foundation of our marriage. I did not check the phone a single time. We returned to the United States 2 weeks later, driving from the airport back to our quiet suburban neighborhood under a gray autumn sky. 3 days after we unpacked our luggage and resumed our normal routines, an aggressive knock echoed through our front door. I looked through the glass pane. My father and mother stood on the porch. Sarah stood behind them. She wore a large white medical mask covering the lower half of her face, her eyes fixed on the concrete mat. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, standing firmly in the threshold with my arms at my sides. Helen's face contorted with rage the moment she saw me. You ignored us. You let your sister suffer in a foreign hospital. You lack a human soul. My father stepped forward, his posture aggressive, invading my personal space. 67 calls, Nora. We begged you for help. You were on a honeymoon while she went under the knife. I raised my hand, stopping his tirade before it escalated further. How did you pay the surgeon, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice level. He ground his teeth together, his face flushing dark red with a mixture of anger and profound humiliation. I called a predatory private lender from the hospital lobby. I took a $30,000 title loan against our house with a brutal interest rate. I drained my retirement account to cover the foreign transaction penalties and the transfer fees. I will be working for another 15 years to pay off a single week in Turkey. I looked at Sarah, noting her silent, shrinking posture, then shifted my gaze back to my father. Cancel your wedding or we're not coming. Those were your exact words 7 days before I walked down the aisle. You issued an ultimatum. You made a choice based on vanity and arrogance. You assumed you could dictate the terms of my life while isolating yourselves from the risks of your own choices. Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but I continued, refusing to yield the floor. If you attended my wedding, you would not possess a high-interest loan threatening your home. If Sarah attended her sister's wedding instead of chasing a discounted cosmetic procedure in a foreign strip mall, she would not require a surgical mask to hide necrotic scarring. I did not ignore your calls out of malice. I ignored your calls because your financial emergencies are not my jurisdiction. You chose to skip the wedding. I chose to enjoy the honeymoon. Thomas stared at me, the reality of his self-inflicted ruin settling over his features as my logic dismantled his victim narrative. Sarah opened her mouth to scream an insult, but Thomas reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her back. He recognized the absolute finality in my posture. They possessed no leverage. I owed them no money, no time, and no emotional labor. I stepped back inside my house, creating a physical barrier between my life and their dysfunction. Have a safe drive home, I stated, closing the wooden door and engaging the deadbolt with a sharp, echoing click. I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my coffee mug, and sat at the counter in absolute peace. I never answered another phone call from them, leaving them to navigate the crushing debt and the physical consequences of the priorities they chose.